So if I asked you what time of year people are most likely to take their own lives, you would probably guess the dead of winter.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
the days are incredibly short, it's freezing, and the holidays can be, really isolating.
Exactly. It just makes intuitive sense. But the data actually shows the exact opposite. Suicides actually peak in the spring, like right as the world is waking up.
Right, which is just so
It
counterintuitive.
is. And it's because human emotion and the profound disruption of it isn't a clean, visible break. It
Right.
isn't like looking at an x-ray of a fractured arm where you can just point and say, there's the problem.
No, not at all. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with the human mind, the internal reality can be, well, completely divorced from the external environment.
Yeah.
The sun might be shining outside, but biologically and cognitively, the person is trapped in a blizzard.
Which is exactly why I am firmly planting myself in the student role for our conversation today, because I have a lot of questions about where the line actually is between a normal bad week and a devastating clinical condition.
And I am very happy to step into the lecturer role to help answer them.
Welcome to class, everybody. For this deep dive, we are drawing our map from section 15.7 of chapter 15 from Psychology 2E.
Notebook is ready.
Perfect, because our mission today is to help you, the listener, really understand the biological, environmental, and cognitive forces that drive these conditions. Because, these aren't just bad moods, they are systemic, life-altering disruptions.
Okay, so let's unpack that. That line between a bad mood and a disorder. Because I think everyone listening has had a day where they just couldn't get out of bed.
Right.
Or maybe a weekend where they had so much nervous energy they couldn't sleep at all. So where exactly is that clinical boundary?
It really comes down to three things: causality, proportion, and impairment. Normal mood fluctuations are event-driven, right? And they're temporary.
Like your team winning a game. Exactly. Your favorite team wins, you're elated. You lose out on a promotion, you are dejected. The emotion matches the event. But mood disorders distort a person's entire outlook, completely untethered from their immediate circumstances.
Okay, so the context doesn't match the feeling.
Right, and they critically impair their ability to function. To make this concrete, Section 15.7 gives us three distinct clinical presentations.
Okay.
Imagine a guy named Blake. He is feeling so utterly worthless and devoid of hope that he cries for hours and physically cannot command his muscles to get out of bed.
That sounds awful.
It is. Then, picture Crystal. She has been awake for 3 days straight. She's talking a mile a minute, and she just maxed out her credit cards on a $3,000 furniture shopping spree she absolutely cannot afford.
Oh, wow. So totally different from Blake.
Completely. And finally, Maria, who just had a beautiful, healthy baby, but she feels overwhelmingly panicked, tearful, and is convinced she is a danger to her child.
Man, three completely different presentations. One is immobile, one is hyperactive, and one is just terrified. But they all share that crossing of the line into, total impairment.
Precisely. They represent the broad categories of mood disorders. So let's start with what Blake is experiencing. Major Depressive Disorder, or MODD.
Okay, the baseline for that one.
Well, the baseline requirement here is experiencing a deeply depressed mood or a profound loss of interest in almost all activities for at least 2 consecutive weeks.
Wait, just 2 weeks? That seems like a really short window for something that severe.
It does seem short, but those 2 weeks are agonizing. And it's not just feeling sad. The psychological emptiness is accompanied by severe physiological symptoms. The brain is essentially malfunctioning.
Like physical symptoms.
Yes, you see significant unintended weight changes, massive sleep disruptions, and there's also the symptom called psychomotor retardation.
Psychomotor retardation, what does that actually look like?
Well, it isn't just feeling sluggish. The brain's motor cortex literally isn't getting the chemical signals it needs to initiate movement efficiently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so even the act of talking or walking feels like moving through wet concrete.
That is terrifying.
And on the flip side, some people experience psychomotor agitation. That's, relentless pacing, hand-wringing, and inability to sit still. And tragically, there is often suicidal ideation.
And once that 2-week threshold is crossed, it's not like you just snap out of it and move on.
Right.
The recurrence rates in the textbook are what really caught my attention.
The relapse statistics are brutal.
Yeah.
If you have one episode of MDD, there is a 50 to 60% chance you will have a second.
Over half.
Yeah. And if you suffer a third episode, there is a 90% chance of a fourth. The more episodes you have, the more entrenched the neural pathways for depression become.
It's a compounding cycle. The brain actually gets better at being depressed.
Sadly, yes. And then, on the other side of that coin, we have bipolar disorder, which is what Crystal was experiencing with that massive shopping spree.
Right.
Bipolar disorder is characterized by vacillating between those deep valleys of depression and the extreme peaks of mania.
And a manic episode. What defines that?
It requires at least 1 week of an abnormally euphoric or highly irritable mood. And the mechanism here is fascinating. The brain's reward center is almost completely uninhibited.
Uninhibited, so they just act on every impulse.
Exactly. The person experiences a flight of ideas, extreme grandiosity. They might quit their job to start a company in a field they know nothing about. They stop sleeping because their brain is just flooding them with energy.
And they engage in reckless behavior, like the credit cards.
Yes. If you want a really visceral first-hand look at this dynamic, watch Janeane Garofalo's character, Jasmine, in the independent film Sweetheart. It really captures it.
I'll have to check that out. It's wild because the textbook calls major depressive disorder the common cold of psychiatric disorders, since it affects around 6.6% of the U.S. population every single year.
Right.
But calling it a cold feels almost dismissive. I mean, if it's as common as a cold, why is it so devastating to things like cardiovascular health and career prospects?
Well, it's a double-edged metaphor. It's meant to highlight how widespread it is, but you are completely right. Unlike a cold, MDD is systemic.
It affects the whole body.
Entirely. The sheer physiological stress of carrying that much emotional pain spikes inflammation throughout the whole body.
Oh, the inflammation.
Yeah. That is why depression is a massive risk factor for developing heart disease in completely healthy patients or rapidly worsening it in those who already have cardiovascular issues. The toll on the heart is immense.
That makes a lot of sense.
And we also have to recognize that depression isn't a monolith. It has specific subtypes, or what clinicians call specifiers, that follow different behavioral and temporal patterns.
Right, like the classic winter blues.
Exactly. The clinical term is seasonal pattern, where the depression is triggered by the reduction in sunlight during specific times of the year, altering the body's circadian rhythms.
And there's another one, right, the chronic one.
Yes, persistent depressive disorder. This is a chronic, melancholic sadness that lasts for at least 2 years. The patient might not have the acute immobilizing symptoms of MDD, but the gray cloud never leaves.
It's just always there. And then there's the subtype Maria was dealing with, peripartum onset, which is widely known as postpartum depression.
Yes, applying to major depression that occurs during pregnancy or in the 4 weeks following birth. It affects roughly 14% of new mothers.
14%, that is a lot.
It is, and the symptoms go far beyond standard sadness or the baby blues. We are talking about severe anxiety, panic attacks, and a profound inability to bond with or care for the newborn.
Which has to be terrifying for the mother.
Absolutely. Nearly 20% of those affected report having thoughts of wanting to harm themselves. We've seen how catastrophic this can be in cases like Andrea Yates, who suffered from extreme peripartum onset depression with psychotic features and tragically drowned her 5 children.
Oh, that case. I want to pause here because this is where a lot of people struggle to understand the mechanism. The textbook notes that this can happen even when a pregnancy is completely desired, planned, and, celebrated.
Yes.
How does the brain hijack a fundamentally joyful survival event, like bringing a child into the world?
Because the brain isn't just reacting to the presence of the baby. It is reacting to a massive, sudden physiological crash.
A crash?
Yeah. During pregnancy, the body is flooded with astronomically high levels of estrogen and progesterone. The moment the baby is born, those hormone levels absolutely plummet back to pre-pregnancy levels within a matter of days.
Wow, just days.
Yes. For a brain that is biologically vulnerable, that sudden withdrawal of hormones, combined with extreme sleep deprivation, essentially shorts out the nervous system's ability to regulate mood.
That makes so much sense. It's an endocrine system shock, which, perfectly sets up the broader question. Why are some brains so biologically vulnerable in the first place? Let's talk about the hardwiring.
If you want to see exactly how much of this is hardwired, just look at twin studies. When researchers look at identical twins who share 100% of their DNA, they look for what's called a concordance rate.
Which means?
It just means the probability that if one twin has a trait, the other will too. For major depressive disorder, the concordance rate for identical twins is 50%, compared to only 38% for fraternal twins.
Okay, which proves a pretty strong genetic link. But when you look at bipolar disorder, the numbers get even more extreme, don't they?
They really do. The concordance rate for bipolar disorder in identical twins jumps to a massive 67% compared to just 16% for fraternal twins.
Wait, 67%?
Yes, that tells us that the genetic blueprint plays a tremendously powerful role, especially in bipolar conditions.
So the hardware, the genetic blueprint, is vulnerable. But what about the software, like the neurotransmitters running the system day to day?
We are primarily looking at serotonin and norepinephrine. These are the chemical messengers that regulate appetite, sex drive, sleep, arousal, and mood.
So pretty much everything.
Basically, yeah. People with mood disorders often have severe dysregulation in these pathways. That is why standard antidepressant medications typically work by artificially boosting the presence of serotonin and norepinephrine in the brain's synapses.
And what about for bipolar?
Conversely, lithium, which has been the gold standard for treating bipolar disorder, actually works by blocking norepinephrine activity at the synapses. It effectively puts a lid on that manic overstimulation.
And it isn't just the invisible chemicals, right? It's the physical structures of the brain themselves, specifically the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex.
Yes. The amygdala is basically your brain's threat detector. It assesses the emotional significance of stimuli. Brain imaging shows that people with depression have highly elevated activity in the amygdala.
Even to things that aren't actually threats.
Exactly, especially when presented with negative stimuli, like photos of sad or angry faces. And what's wild is that this happens outside of conscious awareness.
Really?
Yeah, their amygdala lights up before they even consciously realize they're looking at a sad face. Meanwhile, there is significantly decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the higher order reasoning part of the brain that's supposed to regulate and control those raw emotions.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking this.
Go for it.
So if the amygdala is the brain's emotional gas pedal, constantly revving up fear and sadness and threat detection, and the prefrontal cortex is the brakes, is depression basically having a cinder block firmly pressed on the gas pedal while simultaneously having someone cut your brake lines?
That is incredibly accurate. The threat response is hyperactive, and the biological mechanism required to slow that response down is just offline.
But if someone is born with those genetic cut brake lines, are they just doomed? I mean, is biology destiny?
Not at all. And this brings us to one of the most crucial concepts in modern psychology, the diathesis-stress model. Biology is only half the equation.
Yeah.
The diathesis is your genetic predisposition, that underlying vulnerability. But it takes an environmental stressor to actually pull the trigger. And the biological bridge between the environment and the brain is cortisol, our primary fight-or-flight stress hormone.
The alarm system chemical.
Exactly. When a person experiences severe trauma, especially early life trauma like childhood abuse or the profound loss of a parent, their body floods with cortisol.
And that damages the brain.
Yes. Chronic exposure to high cortisol is literally toxic to the brain. Over time, it alters the physical architecture of the brain. It activates and enlarges the amygdala, and it shrinks the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. So the environmental stress literally carves out the brain disturbances connected to depression.
So trauma fundamentally rewires the hardware. It acts like an acid on the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly.
If that is someone's baseline, it sounds like it wouldn't take much for an adult stressor to tip them over the edge. What kind of modern stressors pull that trigger?
The research highlights what are called exit events. These are significant losses. The death of a loved one, a divorce, a major falling out.
Okay.
But there's a very specific nuance here. Exit events are exponentially more potent if they humiliate or fundamentally devalue the individual.
Humiliate them how?
For example, going through a romantic breakup that is initiated by the other person results in 2 times the rate of major depressive disorder compared to experiencing the death of a loved one.
Wait, really? Twice the rate for a breakup compared to a death?
Yes.
I guess because grieving a death is a shared tragedy, but being dumped feels like a targeted rejection of your core worth. It attacks your identity.
Precisely. The humiliation is the catalyst. And this exact interplay between stress and biology is proven by a landmark study on the 5-HT-TLPR gene, which regulates serotonin. We all inherit 2 copies of this gene, and they can be long or short.
I was actually looking at this study, and it completely reframes the old nature versus nurture debate. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you picture the short version of this gene as building your psychological house on a fault line.
Right.
The fault line itself doesn't destroy the house. You need an earthquake.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. If you carry 1 or 2 short versions of this gene, the fault line, but you experience a peaceful life with few stressful events, you are highly unlikely to experience a depressive episode. The house stands.
But if the earthquake hits...
Exactly. If
Uh,
you have those short genes combined with the earthquake to childhood maltreatment prior to age 9, your risk for chronic adult depression massively spikes. The structure collapses.
And what if you have the long genes?
If you have two long versions of the gene building on solid bedrock, even if you experience that same childhood maltreatment, the risk for adult depression barely moves.
It literally requires both the genetic vulnerability and the environmental trauma locking together.
Yes.
But here's the thing. Stressful events happen to everyone. Breakups happen. Job losses happen. So why do some people with vulnerabilities spiral into a major depressive episode while others somehow process it and move on?
Because the final piece of the puzzle isn't just what happens to you, it's cognitive. It is how you internally interpret and narrate those stressful events.
Like your internal monologue.
Sort of. Psychiatrist Aaron Beck explored this in the 1960s with his concept of depressive schemas. These aren't just bad moods. They are deeply ingrained mental templates that force a person to filter the world negatively.
Like a cognitive heuristic.
Exactly. The brain is trying to save energy by quickly categorizing events, but the template it's using is completely corrupted. If your schema is tuned to rejection, you will automatically interpret a slight frown from a coworker as absolute, undeniable proof that everyone hates you.
Completely filtering out the fact that they just praised your work the day before.
Right? It actively forces you to ignore evidence to the contrary.
It's a confirmation bias for your own misery.
And this leads directly to hopelessness theory. This theory argues that depression stems from a very specific style of negative thinking regarding attribution, how we assign cause and effect.
How does that work in practice?
Let's say a student who desperately wants to go to law school fails an important admissions test.
Okay, a devastating exit event. How do they process it?
If they attribute that failure to stable and global causes, they will internalize it by thinking, I'm inherently stupid, I will never get any smarter, and this proves I will fail at everything I ever try to do in life. That is stable, meaning it's permanent and unchangeable, and global, meaning it ruins every single aspect of their existence.
Okay, to put this in perspective, for anyone listening who maybe just had a terrible day at work, a specific unstable cause is thinking, I completely messed up that one presentation because I didn't sleep well last night.
Yes.
But a global, stable cause is thinking, I am entirely incompetent, I'm a fraud, and my entire career is over. It's the difference between having a contained fire in the kitchen and deciding the entire house is burning down, so you might as well strike the match.
That's exactly it. The global and stable attribution breeds profound hopelessness, and hopelessness breeds depression. And once you are trapped in that depressive state, how you manage those feelings dictates how deep the episode goes.
Which brings us to rumination.
Yes. Rumination is the repetitive, passive focus on the fact that you are depressed. It's dwelling on the symptoms, constantly asking, why am I so unmotivated? Why can't I just snap out of it?
So rumination tricks the brain into thinking it's actively trying to solve a problem by reviewing the data over and over. But really, you're just putting your pain on a treadmill.
Right.
You're exhausted, you're sweating, but you aren't actually moving an inch. In fact, you're just deepening the neural pathway of the negative emotion.
Yes, you are reinforcing the circuit. And the data notes a critical demographic difference here. Women are significantly more likely than men to ruminate when they are distressed.
Interesting. And men.
Men are more likely to seek distraction. This cognitive tendency is believed to be one of the primary reasons why women have significantly higher lifetime rates of MDD, around 20% compared to 13% for men. The rumination loop keeps them trapped in the episode longer.
So if we zoom out and look at the whole picture, we have a biological vulnerability on the fault line. We have a severe environmental stressor, like an intense humiliation, that spikes cortisol and rewires the prefrontal cortex. And we have the cognitive trap of global hopelessness and rumination. When all of those immense forces converge and the person feels completely trapped without any social support, it leads to the ultimate tragedy, suicide.
It does. It is vital to state that suicide is not classified as a standalone disorder. But it is the devastating, fatal outcome of these conditions when the pain simply becomes unendurable.
It's the breaking point.
Around 90% of those who die by suicide have a diagnosis of at least one mental disorder, with mood disorders being the most frequent by far.
The numbers are just staggering. It was the 10th leading cause of death for all ages in 2010. That's an average of 105 suicides every single day in the United States alone.
Which brings us right back to the paradox you mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive, the springtime peak.
Right. Why April and May? We know human emotion isn't an X-ray, but what is the actual mechanism driving that spike when the weather gets nice?
What's fascinating here is that it proves just how profoundly internal these disorders are. Depression doesn't care that the sun is shining. In fact, seeing the world wake up, seeing your neighbors outside smiling and socializing while you are still trapped in a dark, numb abyss, creates a violent contrast.
Oh, wow.
The external world no longer matches their internal reality. It highlights their isolation, making the hopelessness feel even more inescapable.
That makes a chilling kind of sense. The contrast itself becomes the stressor, the isolation deepens.
Exactly. And that isolation can be breached in highly dangerous ways,
Yeah.
particularly through what psychologists call the contagion effect.
The contagion effect.
We know that suicidal behavior can be heavily influenced by external events and social observation. Media coverage of celebrity suicides makes copycat suicides an astonishing 14 times more likely than coverage of non-celebrity suicides.
14 times more likely. That is a massive, quantifiable public health impact based entirely on social communication.
It is. The way a tragedy is broadcast, the way it romanticizes or normalizes the act, can literally trigger vulnerable people on that fault line to act.
That's terrifying.
And returning to the underlying biology one last time, there is a clear physical marker for this ultimate risk. Extremely low levels of serotonin don't just predict suicide attempts.
They don't.
A classic study found that depressed patients with the absolute lowest serotonin levels attempted suicide more frequently, and tragically, they used highly violent methods. It is a biological tipping point where the brain's inhibition systems completely fail.
Which is exactly why having immediate, accessible professional intervention is so absolutely critical. You cannot just think your way out of a chemical tipping point.
No, you can't.
As a public service, if you or someone you know is struggling right now in the United States, you can contact the National Suicide Prevention Hotline simply by dialing 988. Or you can access the crisis text line by texting the word HOME to 741-741. There is help, and there are people waiting to intercept that crisis right now.
Absolutely. Those resources are lifelines. They intervene when the prefrontal cortex can't.
So, synthesizing everything we've covered today, what I'm taking away from my time as a student in this deep dive is a profound shift in perspective. Mood disorders are not a lack of willpower.
Not at all.
They aren't a personal weakness or a character flaw to be judged. They are severe, incredibly complex collisions. It's genetics laying a fragile foundation, brain chemistry misfiring, life trauma physically altering the brain's architecture, and cognitive patterns keeping you stuck in a loop.
That is an incredibly accurate summary of the material. It requires all those distinct pieces locking together to create the profound systemic impairment we see in major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder.
And to you, our listener, understanding the actual mechanics of these disorders isn't just an academic exercise. It's about building a profound, vital empathy, whether it's for a friend, a family member, a coworker, or even for yourself when you are facing these invisible battles.
Empathy is key.
Because you can't see the cut-break lines in someone's prefrontal cortex, and you can't see the structural damage caused by childhood cortisol. But that doesn't mean the crash isn't real.
Well said. And as we close our notebooks for today's class, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We discussed the dark side of social influence, how the media can create a tragic contagion effect for suicide by heavily publicizing a celebrity's death.
Right.
But if human behavior and brain chemistry are truly that susceptible to social observation, could we theoretically reverse engineer it? Could we create a contagion effect for resilience and recovery if we completely change how society widely broadcasts stories of overcoming depression and repairing that fault line?
Now that is a thought absolutely worth ruminating on. Thank you for the class, lecture.
Thank you, student, and thank you for joining our deep dive.